Hello. My name is Kiara Silva and I'm a drawing teacher. I thought of developing, among the many columns I've created, another one, also dedicated to drawing, but this time with a particular focus. The title that I have decided to give it is In the Design of. That is, let's take as an example a series of really important artists, well known, and perhaps not known only for the skill in drawing. They could be painters or great sculptors. Afterwards we will analyze their graphic production, their designs, whether they show characteristic signs or traits in their painting. For a painting, what are the expressive characteristics of the designs? But what can a column like this be used for? It can be useful for all those drawing enthusiasts who are unable to express something more than the subject represented through their drawing. You know well that the difference between a simple illustrative drawing or an artist's drawing is precisely the expressiveness. This means what I am able to express through my graphic sign, my vision of the subject that I am representing. Since this is a very difficult thing to arrive at, there is a need to look, to learn to observe the works of those who are great artists, just to take an example, to take inspiration and to go and read those expressive characteristics that transform the drawing into a work of art. To carry out this section and then carry out the proposed exercises, it is not necessary to already be good artists. This means to be able to paint a drawing, a sketch or any kind of drawing. It will only be necessary to have some small tools and try to enter precisely into the characteristics of the works that we gradually propose. So each issue of this section will be dedicated to a particular artist. We will develop, then we will see, what are the essential characteristics of this artist's sign. We're going to choose subjects that we can somehow transform into works similar to those of this artist, and we're going to then execute an expressive design. The first of these artists that we are going to analyze today is Van Gogh. To start this course, therefore, it is necessary to go and look for some graphic images of Van Gogh's work. I advise you to go and dwell above all on those which are the works dedicated to nature. Then the landscapes, the vegetable part. Then select instead of photos that represent landscapes. They could be Provençal landscapes, which is more or less the same type of landscape that this artist represented. I advise you to choose very simple images where very few natural elements appear, and perhaps a building that could look interesting. Equip yourself with simple tools which are the same tools that the artist used, a soft graffiti, a charcoal or a lithographic pencil that allow you to create this type of effect. And then some inks that could be simple ink colors, gray or sepia colored, are also fine. Take also a small nib in order to be able to trace very light signs and brushes. I recommend the ones with a thin tip. The watercolor ones are fine, or the Japanese ones are also good. The important thing is that they have a conical section and a very sharp tip. Last but not least, as always, an eraser to eventually be able to jot down some mistakes. So I choose this as the image to create. I'm going to reproduce it in a very simple way on my sheet. And then I'm going to create it and then draw it using Van Gogh's own characteristic sign. Then I keep the pictures nearby as an example. I have a simple sketch sheet to work on. Don't forget, the important thing is that it's a very soft paper. It is a fairly large sheet, so I reduce my image to a slightly smaller space in order to also have a sort of frame. If you wanted to hang and frame it, you see. To overlay the design of this landscape, I simply have to bring very few lines, then a horizontal line. The encumbrance of my little architecture, which is more or less 1/3. It is really very simple, so anyone could be able to make it. Now we only report the sketch, so we absolutely do not go into the details of the small volumes of what I see. And simply a little perspective of what we have. Hence these very beautiful fields of lavender and wheat. This is more than enough. And we also report the cloud, which could be an interesting element. Now let's go observe. Those are the examples that I have researched, and let's develop this first drawing with the help of a very soft pencil, which could be a graphite or a 6B. We observe how all of Van Gogh's lines are curved. They are tormented. They are very fat, so they are made with a material like this. Could also be a lithographic pencil, if you can find it. And now let's try to interpret this work by changing the drawing. So it doesn't matter anymore that this work is identically objective, identical to reality, but it does matter that it is expressive. So let's try to go and completely warp all these lines. So drawing, you see, some pretty quick smooth lines. Forgetting about the principles of perspective. Thus removing ourselves in a much more free way. So let's go and describe some details. If we want to describe some details with a slightly thinner tip, we can maybe work with a thin pencil. Remember that in this case the signs must all be dynamic, odd, probative. Because I told you that in this case our goal is no longer to faithfully represent reality, but to have fun trying to find a different sign, no? For example, in this part, if I want to create the shadow, I can try directly to darken it. Don't be afraid to go and pick up on your own signs very strongly. Then we go to create, to search for this tormented effect, you see, in the perspective of these lavender fields, right? Do you see? These are the examples. See here too, right? See how he made all these parts as if they were somehow moved by wind, as if there was a strong wind moving them. As for the clouds, I think you all remember Van Gogh's starry skies, the ones that have all these very strong windings. We could take a cue from this type of line, so maybe work lightly, you see, with a curved sign that is going to wrap everything, you see? Do not be afraid. Now we can start working on the texture of all this work with signs that can always recall his alphabet of signs. Therefore his very characteristic aspect. So to try to give a sense of depth anyway, we could be more descriptive in these initial parts and then gradually lighter and lighter in this final part. So for example, we could go with dots, dashes. See? Very fast. Gradually thicker and thicker, right? Then, with a smaller pencil, I can go fill these parts harder. We could create these types of shadows, for example, then we can do it with the brush as well. Even with our ink. This time we may make smaller marks to give meaning of distance. Of depth. You see? Let's say that this type of exercise is also quite therapeutic because it helps us to free ourselves. Here maybe we work with a slightly thinner pencil. This is still always enough. Let's try to work with signs. With cross, you see. Let's try to work precisely on this type of effect, so many small signs all close together. That create this effect almost done in dots. It looks like it is all broken. Therefore, the signs in reality only recall the idea of the trend, but obviously they do not go to describe in detail what you see. We can also try to invent an element, a natural element which could be a tree, for example. Why not? We could just try to also invent, you see, a tree in the foreground with a very strong sign. You see that it then slowly lightens in the branches. Then go and fill it with very strong and black marks. We have to transfigure what we see. Then let's go, for example, with curved lines. Without never unplug the graffiti from the sheet. Let's go and create the fronds of our tree. Let's maybe just create another row, similar to this one. Always with our signs. Non-verbal hypnosis balances hypnosis. Let's go to the left part of our work, to study another of the tools dear to Van Gogh in drawing, which is ink. Then we can use the ink, so we can get the idea of a less pasty, less greasy than this, more fluid surface. I advise you to use a tone similar to that of graphite, therefore a grey in any case. It could be a hip, a grey cline. And since it is very dark, you can dilute it in a little bit of water in order to use a not very strong grey. As I told you, use a brush with a very thin tip. and rigorously soft. And maybe let's try to create dots with these very light marks. Or small lines. Maybe longer in the initial part. And then shorter further away. Almost similar to dots that disappear in the final part. In this way the effect is obviously very different. While in graffiti before had this great weight that created these very strong blacks, now with ink instead we can create much clearer tones. We always follow the same direction. And we alternate the lines to the points. The lines to the dots are the essential elements of the visual grammar, therefore only through these elements one can express oneself. Do you see? Is that very clear? Also try to thin them out, you see, so that they become more and more distant from each other. And therefore create a less intense effect. You see, that's all the gesture that creates this type of effect. It is not important, so it is not essential to be a good draftsman to be able to achieve this type of effect. Here maybe we only make dots because we are really very far away even in our clouds. For example, we could go with long signs. There is no limit to the imagination you can put into these designs. Because as we said at the beginning, the goal is certainly not to build a fake, so we absolutely don't want to pass ourselves off as Van Gogh. However, through this type of exercise, therefore focusing more precisely on the sign aspect, on the expressive aspect, and not on the truthfulness, on the objectivity of the object of the subject that we represent, we finally have the possibility to free ourselves and to experience effects that otherwise we probably would not be considered. So, choose as many subjects as you like and practice. This is only the first issue of this column that I have designed to help you in some way acquire a certain expressiveness in your graphic sign. As we have seen, this case of Van Gogh was very interesting for some characteristics, and many other artists have completely different ones, and therefore it is also possible to enrich the artistic language, even the sign language, to also achieve very good results. Of course, in this case we have proposed a type of exercise that does not require you to already have a very high drawing skill. If, on the other hand, you are interested in acquiring all those notions that can be useful for really learning to draw even starting from scratch, you can go to our website www.ilcerchio.org. If you are interested in this column dedicated to artists' drawings, like the video and you would promote the creation of others, subscribe to this YouTube channel of the Il Cerchio di Giotto or visit our blog or Facebook page. Goodbye, and see you soon.